Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the September 11th Planning Policy Commission to order, and it currently is 6:31 p.m. It's odd even saying that. September 11th, I know today's the 24th anniversary of the attacks across the country. I still remember where I was. I don't know if you guys all remember where you were. I still remember being in school, being woken up, and just the shock of it all. I thought it'd be poignant to provide a moment of reflection for what happened 24 years ago. Today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Kristen, do we have a quorum this evening?
Yes, we do.
We do indeed. It's great to see everybody. I hope you all had a wonderful summer, doing various things. I think Eric was the last person I saw. Good to see you, Commissioner Olener. I know Commissioner Zakharoff's been busy. Just talking with Commissioner Krass, sounds like he's back on his bike, so that's good. But I hope everybody here has had a good summer and back to school and back to us for the Planning Policy Commission. So it's good to see everybody. We'll begin with some minutes that we're going to approve of from a long time ago. In fact, July 10th. So if you can put on your thinking caps and remember all the way back then. If you have any concerns about the minutes that were provided in your packet, please speak now. All right. Hearing none, those minutes are approved. We do have a slight echo in the room. That's the presenter. All right, we're going to forge ahead. So we are going to move on to public comment, and right now we're holding general public comment for the good of the order. And staff, we're wondering if anyone has signed up online, seeing there is nobody in the room with us. It's less of a long pause. They're still trying to figure out some technical issues. Commissioner Millender-Irwin, how was your summer?
Get that on. Very short and uneventful. I had a very surly teenager that was not happy to go back to school, but I was happy to drive them there. Yes. Hope you all had a great summer as well.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. Commissioner Adair, how was your summer?
A single mom in it, a lot of it, because my husband went out of the country for a while, so that was a lot of fun with a 4 and a 7-year-old, and lots of birthday parties, lots and lots of birthday parties.
That's great. Hopefully, I know your husband from a little bit of different work in the city, but hopefully Paul had a good summer.
I think he did.
Okay, wonderful. Kristen, how was your summer?
Not long enough.
If you don't know, our planning department here at the city had some unanticipated exits. So our planning department has been under a lot of stress, but the consummate professionals that they are have done a tremendous job, and we're looking forward to get back to work with them. But I should ask one more time, do we have anybody that would like to speak on general comments from the public?
No, Chair, we do not.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. All right, we will skip that. And we will get down to our regular business, and the first part tonight is the comprehensive plan amendments. Kristen Leeson, our principal planner, will be presenting this evening. So Kristen, when you are ready, please go ahead.
There we go.
It just doesn't want to stay on that first page. We'll see if I can get it to do. So, slight correction. Kristen Leeson, Planning Manager, to talk about the comprehensive plan amendments tonight. And there are only a few this year. It's rather small. I mean, you all went from a huge update last year with the periodic update to this one. So we're just looking for a little feedback really on some policies. I'm just going to talk about one policy, one issue that's come up, and then Jillian and John, who's going to be virtual, will be talking about, give you a much longer explanation on the transportation element and concurrency. Okay. My computer does not want to let me go anywhere tonight. There we go. Okay, so our question for your direction is, do any changes need to be made to the proposed co-living policy? So as you might recall, we have a docket every year. We prepare a docket, which is a list of things that staff and or the public would like to potentially research as a possible amendment to the comprehensive plan. And first, the Planning Policy Commission makes a recommendation to council about what should remain on that list. And then in March, the council approves or does not approve and amends it. So on our docket this year, we had 5 sort of items grouped into 4 buckets. First was to change or consolidate the single-family zones to more accurately reflect the multi-uses, the multi-unit capabilities that they now have due to the middle housing regulations that were approved in May of this year. Second, there was a co-policy House bill requiring cities to allow co-housing, which also includes single-room occupancies. And we did the amendments to the code, but we have not put them in our comprehensive plan yet. Another was to remove the capital facilities designation and merge these zones that were under that designation into comparable zones. Our reason for doing this was that right now we did a city surplus and identifying properties that the city no longer needs and selling those, but every time you sell them, the intent of the capital facilities designation and zonings are to identify publicly owned properties for public purpose. But once we sell them off, you have to rezone them. So we're trying to simplify our processes right now. We're also proposing to rezone and redesignate a parcel. It's the food bank, food and clothing bank, from capital facilities as the zoning and capital facilities as the land use designation to cultural and business district zone and retail land use designation. And then lastly, which you'll be hearing about later, is updating the transportation element to update concurrency as well. It's not my night. There we go. So I talked about 1 and 3. One of the reasons is that, as Chair Voice mentioned, we have had a reduction in staff, so that limits what we can do. Number 1, removing the single-family names. It's a name change, and it's not urgent at this time, so we decided to postpone that. Number 3, removing the capital facilities land use designation turned out to be much more complex than we originally thought it would be, because it's not just owned by city, it also covers school properties, PSE services, Verizon services, so it just got to, and some of those have different regulations, so it just got to be a little bit more complex, and we need to spend more time doing it than we were able to do this year if we want to do a good job. So I'm going to start with the co-living policy. And co-living, as defined in the regulations that you just adopted, it means residential development with sleeping units that are independently rented and lockable and provide living space and sleep space. This also includes single room occupancy, as I mentioned before. So our proposed policy is to allow market rate, non-subsidized rental homes such as co-living scenarios, which are affordable to people in the workforce earning as low as 50% of area median income. And 50% is generally because it's extremely difficult to rent or own something below 50% of area median income. Those are usually almost always subsidized, so that's the reason for 50%. Oh, kind of didn't do this one. Rezone and redesignation. This is a quasi-judicial process, meaning that it is just one parcel that is proposed for rezone. And the Planning Policy Commission, until 2 years ago, used to make the recommendation to City Council, but it becomes very personal and can become a little bit subjective. So it now goes to the hearing examiner for more objectivity than you all may be able to provide. You're great at what you do, but sometimes you might live next door or something like that. So trying to remove the subjectivity from that. So the public hearing goes to the hearing examiner. The hearing examiner then makes the recommendation to council, and the council recommends it. The recommendation is conditional upon the land use designation change being approved by city council. So just to go over this parcel, right now, on the left-hand side, the existing one, it is, as I mentioned, it's zoned community facilities. And the proposed zone is cultural and business district. And on the north and on the west sides, it is zoned cultural and business district, or CBD. The land use designation is currently community facilities. And if it were to be changed to retail, the land use designation to the north and the west is retail. Therefore, it is not a spot zone. It is still serving a public benefit, and it meets the criteria of a rezone, of a quasi-judicial rezone. Its transportation element, as I mentioned, will be discussed in a few minutes. The timeline. The public hearing on this will be held in 2 weeks on September 25th. October 7th, it'll go to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee for recommendation to council, and council will tentatively take action on November 10th. So that is all I have. And the one question is, do any changes need to be made to the proposed co-living policy?
Great, thank you, Kristen. Any questions from our commissioners? Commissioner Zakharoff?
I have a question regarding the 50% limitation there. So if we are talking about the market rate, we might just, I think, we might just leave the 50%. I mean, not include any percentage there, because what if a person with very low income somehow finds a place to live? So maybe we just should.
I
Not
read
have
it
it.
again today and I thought the same thing.
Thank you.
Sure. But I need everyone, I mean, if everyone else agrees, then that can be a change that we can make.
Commissioner Krass?
Thank you for bringing that up. It's a little confusing. It adds another element, which I'm not sure what that means. Does that mean that they can't charge more than a certain rate under? So what does the 50% in this case mean?
Actually, that's
It's
as
confusing.
Commissioner Zakharoff brought
Yeah.
up, it's not necessarily confusing, but it's not enforceable.
No, it's also confusing.
Okay.
So what does it mean though? It's,
50% of the area median income?
no, I understand what that means, but
Okay.
what does it mean with relate to allowing people to have, I have a house, has all these bedrooms, I'm going to make co-living spaces out of them. What does the 50% mean in that?
That would mean that it would be the property owner's choice not to rent below 50% area median income, which is something that we can't enforce. So that's why that's why I agree with Commissioner Zakharoff's
I
request.
mean,
to remove-
if it's not subsidized,
Right,
correct me if I'm wrong, don't they just look at someone's credit and ability to pay and?
right, that
and then-
would be
so
the
the-
point
so
of
what
removing
they're-
it.
So it kind of comes out in the wash anyway.
Right, that would be the point in removing that.
Okay, I agree with you.
50% from it, yeah.
Any other questions?
So then it would read, allow market rate, non-subsidized rental homes such as co-living scenarios, affordable to people in the work, or we can just say, such as co-living scenarios, period. Does that sound? Yeah. Does that sound right? Okay, so we just start at scenarios, stop at scenarios. Okay. All right.
All right. Looks like everyone's comfortable with that. Any other questions for Kristen regarding the amendments that don't have anything to do with concurrency? All right. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so we're going to move along. The transportation element is part of the 2025 Comprehensive Plan amendments, but the changes revolve around a topic on which the commission is not fully knowledgeable, so this presentation involves some more detailed discussion. John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager, and Gillian Straub, Management Analyst, will be presenting tonight. Please go ahead. John or Gillian?
Thank you.
Is it Gillian or Jillian?
It's Jillian.
Jillian.
Thank you. We're just waiting a moment so I can share my screen and then we'll dive in.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I just want to do a quick sound check with John to make sure that he can hear and see us and that we can hear and see him just given the tech issues this evening. So John, can you unmute and just say a few words?
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager, and look forward to hearing your feedback.
Awesome, thank you. We can hear you just fine in here. So thank you for that introduction. Like the chair mentioned, I'm here to discuss Issaquah's multimodal transportation concurrency policy. So let's dive in. So we're here today to receive your feedback on the changes to the transportation element and the mobility action plan which contain our transportation concurrency policy. These changes have been discussed by the Transportation Advisory Board about 4 times throughout 2025. They've also seen the language changes that were in your packet today, the red-line versions of both of those documents. And after we get your feedback, we'll move on to follow that same schedule that Chris and Lisa just mentioned in terms of going to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee, the public hearing at this committee, and then council action in November. Before we dive in, I'd actually like to ask for a raise of hands on who's familiar with transportation concurrency. It'll help me kind of calibrate the explanation I give at the top. Okay, we have some tentative and some more confident hand raises, I'd say. All right. So the direction we're asking for tonight, we'll talk about 5 big policy changes to our transportation concurrency policy, and for each of them, I'll explain essentially what the change is. I'll ask for any clarifying questions that'll help you better understand why we're making this change and what it means, and then ask for these pieces of feedback. Do you agree with the changes as presented, and are there any additional changes that we need to make in order to fully clarify these changes in the documents? So with that, let's talk a little bit about what transportation concurrency is. So transportation concurrency is mandated by the Growth Management Act, and it says that concurrency is achieved when public facilities and services are provided to meet demand. This is most important when new developments are proposed, which change the demand on our system. For example, a new development goes in that changes the demand for transportation services, puts more cars onto the street, that kind of a thing. So this is done through the Growth Management Act, and it also stipulates that improvements to ensure that the system is usable are in place at the time of development, or the developer pays fees to make sure that those improvements are made within 6 years of the development. So with that, we also have a couple of pieces of this system that we aren't going to touch tonight, but are important for you to understand. We have a concurrency model, which assesses Issaquah's transportation system through planned use development through about 2040 or 2050. And that concurrency model is updated every 3 to 5 years. This is not a change to the technical model we're proposing tonight, but rather a change to our policy that sets some of our goals in terms of what facilities are provided. And we also want to note that public agencies have to meet deficiencies that are currently present in the system. We can't ask developers to pay for something that we already know doesn't meet our level of service guidelines. And we're here tonight to really talk about the transportation concurrency policy. So I'll walk through an example of how this works in practice. So let's say a developer proposes multifamily housing. The trips or the car trips that would add are assessed against Issaquah's trip bank, which is established as part of that concurrency model review, which happens at a regular pace. If the housing proposal would add more trips than our bank, so for example, if there are 500 trips in our trip bank and a development would add 600, then we're over here on the left side of the screen where the developer either has to revise their proposal, has to propose additional mitigations to ensure that the transportation system can handle these additional trips, or go through a bit of an appeals process. However, we're here to really talk tonight about the right side of this flow chart. So if the housing proposal adds fewer trips than are in our trip bank, then it can proceed through the concurrency process and the building permit process. So once they submit for building permits, staff assess the impacts to the transportation system, and we assess impact and mitigation fees based on the number of new trips that would be created because of this development. We use those fees to make the needed improvements to our transportation system to allow for additional capacity for the trips that we know are needed. So this is really kind of like a full circle, right? We assess how many trips we think are needed through that concurrency model and the trip bank. Developments come in and kind of withdraw from the trip bank, and we use the fees from those developments to pay for the improvements needed to ensure that our system works as intended and we meet our level of service guidelines. So we're really here tonight to talk about pedestrian, bike, and transit level of service, though of course there's also automobile level of service, which is what the concurrency model update mostly deals with, but our concurrency policy update is focused on multimodal considerations. It's important to know that developments still go through that process with pedestrian and bike fees and pay for the improvements that are needed. However, they don't pass or fail concurrency on the basis of new pedestrian trips added, for example, to our system. We also don't currently have a transit impact fee. Rather, these projects are funded through other means when we have improvements that would benefit our transit system. Level of service, I've mentioned a couple of times, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means for pedestrians, for bikes, and for transit. However, level of service maps are desired connectivity based on planned land use and other considerations. It essentially sets goals for what our connection for different types of users looks like across the system. And we plan for these improvements through our capital improvement plan and our transportation improvement plan. So with that, let's talk a little bit about why we're opening this up and why we're here today. So state law dictated that we needed to review our transportation concurrency policy. House Bill 1181 was passed in 2023, and it stated that cities and counties that are subject to the Growth Management Act should ensure they have multimodal considerations in their LOS. That's the first thing our consultants looked at, was compliance with state law. They determined that our current system as written actually does comply with the multimodal considerations that the state wants to see. However, they did note that it would be an opportunity to better align our current system with the goals outlined in the Mobility Action Plan and several other planning documents. So we knew that this was an opportunity to really bring ourselves into better alignment with already established community goals. So that's why we're presenting these proposed changes to our transportation concurrency policy. We also have some point-in-time data that's kind of interesting about what our community says we need in terms of transit. So the 2025 Community Survey ranks 17, it does a lot of things, but it ranks 17 major services on both importance and satisfaction, and public transit and bike facilities both rank in the top 10 there. So this is a way of seeing, having our community say, hey, these services are really important to us, and we're not as satisfied as maybe you'd want us to be with these services, so these are places to pay a little bit more attention to in the future. So that's also guided some of our work in this project. It also helped us understand that there's really low self-reported use of our sidewalk facilities, bike facilities, or transit as a way to get to work or to school. Most people drive alone to work or to school, and we know that we have goals to increase transit ridership, increase bike usage, that kind of a thing. So this project is a way to enhance that. So transportation concurrency lives in a couple of places. It's not a single standalone document. Rather, the level of service guidelines, those goals, are enshrined in the comprehensive plan, the transportation element, in those goals and policies. And then how we get there, the tools, methods, and resources are outlined in the Mobility Action Plan actions. So we're going to be talking about both sets of documents today, and they work in tandem, as you're more than familiar with. Because we're opening these documents up, we also have some minor housekeeping updates just to bring these documents up to date. We won't be spending a lot of time talking about those, but those red lines are in your packet. Okay, I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions on how transportation concurrency works before we dive into the policy changes.
Great, thank you, Jillian. Are there any questions for Jillian? Commissioner Olener.
Can you explain how the bank is formed and calculated?
I'm wondering if John can jump in here. I can give an overview, but
Yes.
he might be better suited.
Yeah, so the way that we form the bank is first look at the existing travel patterns throughout the city and the existing level of service. And then the team that's working on it looks at the number of developments that are in the pipeline, whether it's through development agreements or other methods, maybe in the permitting process, and then adds those future trips to the network, and then looks at the land use around the city and looks at the potential trips that could be generated. And then what they do is they also look at the transportation improvements that will be made over the next 6 years, and then have a model that measures service, which for the city of Issaquah is the average delay at a signalized intersection, and the value of A through F is D or better. This isn't school. A D isn't as bad as it sounds. And except for 6 intersections that can be E or F for the level of service. And so with that, then what they do is they calculate basically how many trips can be added to the system and in the next 6 years and maintain the adopted level of service, considering the improvements that are going to be made over the next 6 years. And so then that gives a number that community planning and development track as development permits come in, and then take permits away or take trips away from the trip bank until we get to 3 to 5 years, or when 50% of the trip bank has been used up, and then we recalculate it again. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. It was far more complicated than I imagined, but thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Crafts. And just a heads up for John, I don't know if he needs to check his connection. You're cutting in and out a little bit, John. So just a heads up. Commissioner Crafts.
Hi, thanks. So, correct me if I'm wrong, so when Black Diamond and Maple Valley have huge developments that come in and put a lot more cars on, that just eats up the bank that we have here, so it impacts developments within the city, or how do we think about that? Because we don't control that, but I remember seeing on that one pie chart, a good portion of our traffic is drive-through traffic. So, yeah, so I am curious the impact of if someone, and maybe we'll get to this, wants to do development within Issaquah, but the bank has been eaten up by some developments that Issaquah has no control over down in Black Diamond, for example.
I've got 2 thoughts on that. The first one is the city is responsible for accommodating the traffic that comes from outside the city. So I guess in the way you think of it is it does eat into it, which is also why we calibrate the model every 3 to 5 years. However, if that trip makes a stop in Issaquah, it's no longer considered a pass-through trip. And so if the trip stops at a daycare or to get coffee on their way to work or picks up groceries on their way home, then that's not a pass-through trip, and that would also be one that would be counted differently. Does that make sense?
It does, but I bet you I would put dollars to donuts that most of the pass-through traffic isn't stopping. They're just getting through but I understand what you said.
Yeah, it sounds like out of the 36% that's just passed through, that's why you guys do your remodeling every 3 to 5 years, is because it's such a big amount
And
of.
that's one of the reasons.
Okay. Any other questions for Jillian or John before we continue to move on? All right.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about 5 main changes to our transportation concurrency system. They're going to be focused again on pedestrians, bike, and transit level of service. We're going to ask you these 2 questions after we review each one of them. So I just have them up on the screen again. Do you agree with the new or amended policies as recommended, and do we need to clarify anything about the way that these are worded to appropriately capture your and TAB's intent? So with that, like I mentioned, we brought these items to the Transportation Advisory Board 4 times over the course of 2025. They really shaped the recommendations and helped make them more considerate of the system as a whole and all different kinds of transportation users. They also saw the changes to the documents that you all see tonight and provided their feedback as well. So generally their feedback was that they supported the multimodal considerations that we're including. They wanted us to consider impacts to vehicular travel, knowing that the goal is to create a system where folks have a choice between, for example, transit and car use, but the reality today is that many folks need to use a car to get around Issaquah. So we don't want to have any of these further impact vehicular delay in Issaquah, knowing how important that is to our community. They also wanted to ensure that our investments are practical and feasible, that they're targeted to where they're going to have the most impact. For transit level of service, they wanted us to clarify where we have an advocacy role with our service providers versus where we can make direct impact. And then they wanted us to enhance or call out safety considerations where they exist throughout some of these proposed changes. So these are the priorities and suggested changes from TAB. You're going to see them a lot throughout the next couple of slides. They had a lot of impact on the work that we're presenting to you all. So the first change that we're going to discuss is to pedestrian level of service. So the map on the screen displays Issaquah's pedestrian network, and this is the proposed level of service. So the map stays the same between the proposed and the current. Our change is to the facility that's provided for Tier 1 and Tier 4 streets. So this maps all of our sidewalks and local streets where we expect pedestrians to walk. And our level of service calls for enhanced sidewalks, for example, in areas where we have higher density or is affected by planned land use. So for example, the Highlands as well as Central Issaquah are areas where we call for kind of the highest level of sidewalk facility, enhanced sidewalks on both sides of the street. We know that we need the ability for pedestrians to move throughout the transportation system regardless of where they are. So we also have guidelines for our Tier 4 facilities as well. These are things like speed limits and calling for maybe a sidewalk on one of the sides of the streets, knowing that those are areas that see less pedestrian use but still connect to the rest of our system and are important. So the proposed changes we have today are actually included in this. So the first one is to Tier 1, and I'll actually flip over to this map briefly. So as it's currently written, our pedestrian level of service guidelines call for an enhanced sidewalk on both sides of the streets within the Central Issaquah Regional Growth Center, which is this box-ish shape in green. We would like to expand that to the entire Central Issaquah neighborhood, which is the black border here. This is to better align our pedestrian level of service with the Central Issaquah plan, which calls for this higher level of pedestrian connection throughout Central Issaquah. So this is really just alignment with other city plans and our vision for this area as a whole. So that's the first change. The second change, and I'll flip back to the map at this point, is to provide options for how to meet the Tier 4 level of service guideline. So our current policy as written is that you can meet this guideline on a Tier 4 street by having a speed limit that's 20 miles an hour. We'd like to provide the option that if your street already has a sidewalk and you're on a Tier 4 street, that you've met the Tier 4 level of service guideline because pedestrians have a safe way to move throughout that street. So this is just providing options for ways to meet that goal. We're not saying we're going to put sidewalks throughout all of our Tier 4 streets, but this is really just an acknowledgement where there are actually already pedestrian facilities on some of our Tier 4 streets. So with that, you'll see this change reflected in Policy D1, and the first 2 bullet points there are what we just discussed, prioritizing pedestrian connection and providing options to meet Tier 4 standards. TAB also requested that we include something on the practicality of investments, again speaking to making those investments where they're going to impact the most pedestrians. There are no changes to any mobility action plan items proposed as part of this. This supports TAB feedback, and TAB was supportive of the language changes that you all see here today. So I'd like to ask, is there anything that you all need to know to provide feedback on this item?
Thank you, Jillian. Actually, this is working very well, so taking these brief pauses before we continue to move on. I don't know what type of feedback you're going to get from us. We haven't met in a while, so it could go
Okay.
either way.
Okay, you're coming off of summer, so,
Right.
okay.
It could either be very quick, or you could be here for the next 3 hours. Commissioner Kratz.
So you probably know my wife who's on the tab, so she's probably, may have asked some of these similar questions. So I get tier 1, makes a lot of sense. Tier 4, so so I'll use a neighborhood that I'm kind of familiar with because I ride my bike through, so Squawk. I don't think there's any sidewalks in Squawk, it's a residential neighborhood. In this, would the speed limit then be changed to 20? I'm not sure what is it now?
So, John might be able to talk a little bit how this would functionally work, but the way it would work is that the guideline would be that all of those tier 4 streets should be at 20 miles an hour. We don't necessarily survey all of those streets annually to make sure that they're in compliance with this like very one specific guideline. But they could either meet it through lowering the speed limit or through providing or noting an existing sidewalk. John, do you have anything?
I say,
Sorry.
if there's no sidewalk, that's too expensive to build sidewalks, it's
Yep.
easier to change a sign.
Yes.
So I'm just curious if you've gotten community feedback of changing people's, it may already be 20 there, but if it's 25 going to 20, then I'm sure the people who live in those neighborhoods would probably have some input, and probably mix on both sides. Most people would probably like it, but I'm just curious how that fits in as that change.
John, I don't know if you can speak to kind of the process for meeting.
Yeah, I can talk to this. So the city has not done it, even though we've had this policy for a number of years that Tier 4 would be met with a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. The process to change the speed limit would be one of two ways. Either an engineering study would be completed and then council would approve the lower speed limit, or the city would adopt procedures for lowering the speed limit for a non-arterial, which is what the Tier 4 streets are, and then the speed limit could be lowered to 20. This is a step we haven't taken, but looking into how we want to go about and do this as a city would be a next logical step.
But if it's been a policy for a while, then it's not a policy if no one's ever looked at it. I'm just trying to understand, what does it mean to be a policy if do we enforce it, create something around it? And it's more about how we get there. I noticed in Bellevue, like in Lakemont, I saw them changing signs of speed limits, and probably great. But I'm just curious, is this going to be like, okay, all streets that don't have sidewalks are now 20 miles an hour, and it sounds like there's been a policy, but I'm just trying to understand what would be different in this case if it's already been a policy, but we haven't done anything.
What would be different is a street that already had sidewalk on one side could meet the Tier 4 standard.
I was saying the ones who don't have sidewalks. I just picked on one neighborhood.
Right.
And those are very vocal people, as we know, and there's no sidewalks at all on either side. So I'm just curious what that means and what's different, because I think we'll have to explain it in a clear and concise way.
I think, John, I can talk a little bit about the overall project list and how these tiers are used, if that could be helpful. So we know we have limited resources, staff time, money, all of that. We're going to focus our resources on those pedestrian connections that have the most impact. So that might actually be those kind of Tier 1 pedestrian LOS connections. And you'll see those show up in our capital improvement plan and our transportation improvement plan. So there are these policies do guide what projects actually end up happening. It's just a fact that because Tier 4 is a lower level priority, it doesn't show up as much in some of our work. So we have the ability to do it by having a policy. We just maybe haven't had the time or resources to pursue the kind of comprehensive change there. John, have I characterized that correctly?
Yes, that is very well said.
So then play that out. Does it make even sense to have a Tier 4 policy?
Yeah.
Because if you're not going to do it, then don't say you're going to do it and then don't do it, and then people are disappointed that you didn't do it. So
I think.
I'm fine either way. I think we should just choose.
Yeah, I think maybe a way to think about it is that by having a stated goal for Tier 4 streets, when we have the additional time and resources to pursue that change, we can do it without going through this process again. We can already have gotten the community input on it that's needed in order to make that change. It's just that without infinite time or resources, we just can't get there right now. So I understand your point that this doesn't actually functionally change much in the moment, but it does change what we have the ability to do in the future.
Interesting conversation. Thank you both. Any other questions for Jillian on this particular topic? Commissioner Adair.
Hi, maybe you can expand a little on the logic of putting schools in Tier 2, but then you have another section on schools and developing sidewalks, et cetera, around schools. So it's kind of, I'm just wondering, because there are a lot of areas in Issaquah I've noticed where there aren't a lot of great walking routes or protected areas for kids to walk to school. And so is it possible to consider like moving schools up to Tier 1? Right now you only have a quarter mile designated in Tier 1 around the school. Like if you've gone to Issaquah Valley Elementary when school is out or in, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Especially like their parents biking their kids to school, and they're weaving in and out of traffic and that kind of thing. So I just want to draw attention to that because there is kind of a little aside I've noticed too on page 100 to prioritize, school connections and network investments, but it's not really assigned a tier or a priority level within the rest of the document.
John, I'm curious if you know the history on this one. This didn't come up in our conversations with tabs. This is a new question for us.
Yeah, I don't know the history on it. I believe a lot of this happened before my time being involved in the transportation element and the mobility action plan. I'm just guessing, so if I heard correctly, Tier 1's within a quarter of a mile of the school, and then after that would be Tier 2. Is that correct? And then we also talk about connecting to schools?
It looks like Tier 2 right now is a quarter mile of the school. So schools aren't even listed in Tier 1. And it looks like then there's kind of an aside about schools, but there's no stated priority. It just says this is what we're going to try and do with schools, but it doesn't list where they're ranked in the overall scheme of
John,
things.
do you mind if I jump in really quick?
Oh,
This
go
is
for it.
This is Kristen Leeson, planning manager. So if I recall correctly, and I was here for Mobility Action Plan and was here for Central Issaquah Plan and did do the last mobility plan. So if I recall correct, so in enhanced sidewalks, you're going to have landscape strips on both sides. They're going to be wider and they're going to have trees and they're going to have curb and gutter, but they're also a lot more expensive to build. So just saying that you need sidewalks within a quarter mile of school, those are more likely to get built, and that's what we need, than an enhanced sidewalk, because it's just not going to cost as much. So I understand that maybe you want it to look prettier on the way to a school, but you're still going to, at least if it's in a Tier 2, you're still going to get the sidewalk.
Okay, but just to continue, kind of build off of what Jillian said, is she's saying like priority is it's building side. I mean, I don't care, I want it to get built. I don't care how pretty it is, as long as it's safer for kids, but if you're listing that, the implication is that Tier 1 is a higher priority than Tier 2, and then it's kind of like, I'm just, looking at it.
I think I was maybe a little too strong on saying priority. I think this helps us score the projects that go into the transportation improvement plan. However, when looking at the different tiers, some of it depends on where development is proposed versus where the city can take action to, for example, improve a sidewalk. So it just ends up being scored a little bit differently. So thinking about what's going to turn over in Central Issaquah will probably be developer initiated, whereas some of these tiers are probably more subject to city investment first to make these changes.
And you look at Central Issaquah, Old Town, and the Highlands, when we looked at the wider sidewalks, that's because more pedestrians were going to be anticipated to be on a sidewalk at one time, whereas if you're going to a school, you'll have a kid and a parent walking to school one direction at one time, or twice during the day, but so many of those drive or take the bus. But so the anticipation was looking 20 years out.
Issaquah Valley at drop-off. You'll see there's a lot more. And then there's bikes competing with the sidewalks and stuff too. So I'm like, and there's a development going in right next to it. And I'm just using this as an example that,
Right.
and it isn't kind of, and it's on a trail.
And this is
Yeah.
looking 20 years out.
Yeah.
So the anticipation is that Central Issaquah and Old Town, and Old Town already does, is going to have more people on the sidewalks who need those wider spaces and those barriers at one time. I don't think this lowers the priority of getting schools in there at all. I think it's like Jillian said, it's a different thing. You've got developers who are going to do Central Issaquah, and they've already done the Highlands, and the rest of it is like going to be left up to public funds. So what can we build?
Is it fair to say, Chair Voice, is it fair to say that like all new development, we require the tier 2 sidewalks near a school regardless? New
I think this
development
is all new development.
would require tier 2.
It depends on where it's located, right? So if a development occurs, for example, in Central Issaquah, then it would actually require that tier 1
Okay.
level of service. So there's a geographic breakdown in the tiers that's kind of important, but we don't as clearly delineate kind of who's doing the improvements and who's paying for them, really. So.
Any follow-up for the team on this one? Okay, thank you, everyone.
I guess I'm curious if this would be the appropriate time to ask for your feedback on those questions of, do you agree with the changes in how they're captured in the transportation element and MAP? We can also save it for the end. I just know we have a fair bit of content to go through, so I don't want any feedback here to get lost.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, looks like you're answering the questions perfectly, Jillian, thank you.
All right. All right, so now we're moving on to bike level of traffic stress. So while pedestrian level of service calls out what facilities are needed based on that planned land use, bike level of traffic stress actually maps how comfortable it would be on different bike linkages throughout the city. So shared use paths, sidewalks, and trails would be for different types of riders. So bike level of traffic stress 1 is going to be most comfortable for most people. Thinking about, for example, families biking with little kids. Tier 4 is going to require some technical skill and confidence, thinking about maybe a bike lane on a shared, on a busy street with some higher speeds. So we rank our bike facilities throughout the city 1 through 4, moving through difficulty in that way. However, what our current methodology does not do is capture slope. Knowing how hilly Issaquah is, we wanted to better map what the comfort or the experience actually is of biking in Issaquah. So this is the change we're proposing, to add slope to that methodology and remap our city bike network with slope included, still using that kind of comfort scale from 1 to 4. So the change here is really included in the transportation element language. There are no changes to policy as a result of this change, and there are no mobility action plan changes. It just changes how we look at the system and then prioritize those investments to improve bike level of traffic stress where we can. TAB was supportive of this feedback at the policy level, and then when we brought the language to them, they had a few things that they wanted that we are addressing, so I want to make sure I call that out for all of you. So they supported the language and policy changes. They wanted to include additional language supporting the entire bike network and not just talking about facilities in isolation. So we've added a little bit to the Goal E discussion to kind of capture what our network looks like right now and kind of describing some of those different types of facilities. And then they wanted us to review Exhibit 14, the priority bike network, for accuracy. Adding slopes is really difficult because the slope can change throughout what we'd consider one linkage on our bike network. So they just wanted us to review that again for accuracy. And while it wasn't included in your materials because it was completed yesterday, that review has been done. So it'll be in materials going forward, and I'd be happy to share with this group following this meeting that updated map. So with that, again, I'm going to kind of ask for any clarifying questions and your feedback.
Commissioner Krass, I'm surprised you're the bicyclist in the group.
Since I'm a tier 4 type of person. So Newport is probably a 4 in terms of, because it's a skinny shoulder, high speed, people dropping off their kids per the last conversation, all over the place. Is the goal on some of this, it's more of I get called on, so now I can ask a question. It wasn't planned. Is the goal for some of the facilities that may be a 4 to try to make it a 3, so it's more
Yeah.
accessible to people, especially with e-bikes now making probably people who are less experienced capable of using that as a mode of transportation? Is that a stated goal to go
Yeah.
from 4s to 3s or from 3s to 2s?
It's exactly from 4 to 3. So the goal is to have at least a BLTS score of 3 or better on the priority bike network. We also know that there are places where this probably just isn't going to be possible, which is why this language about investments that are practical and feasible are important. Thinking about something like Issaquah Fall City Road. Like, could you ever make that feasibly comfortable enough, or something like that for most people? Probably not.
And that's not really a commuting area where Newport
No.
could be. So there's
Right.
another layer
Yes.
of
Yeah.
what is the lens of, is this for recreation? Probably not, because
Right.
it's more for people who are commuting or using it to get to transit or something like that, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see a little bit of that transit connection piece come into the transit LOS that we're going to talk about at the end, so.
All right, and we have, looks like either a comment or a question from Commissioner Matthews, who is joining us online this evening.
Hi there. I did have a question. I'm hoping I'm asking it in the right place, but it's kind of a follow-up to the last question. It has to do with buffered bike lanes. So, for example, I know you brought up Newport Way. Excuse me. So, if you're on West Newport Way, there's a shared bike lane and walking path. And as he was stating about the e-bikes, it gets pretty dangerous for pedestrians on a shared biking experience. So when you're a pedestrian and your back is to bikes, it's easy to step in their path because they don't stay in their designated lanes. So I'm wondering what the thought process was to have a shared bike and pedestrian lane. Because it's actually a commuter, so there's like a bunch of kids that are waiting for the bus. There's a lot of people who walk into town, so I wasn't really sure what the thought process was for having a shared pedestrian and bike path together. And maybe that needs to change for future areas where they put these type of lanes in.
John, I'm curious if you worked on
Hope
this
that
project.
makes sense.
That does make sense. John, I'm curious if you worked on this project. If not, we can follow up with the project manager who did and get you an answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. So is this on Newport Way near Bellevue where we've got the,
It is between Bellevue, Lakemont Way and
Yep.
Sunset.
so that would be more of an interim type of improvement because we have a complete streets policy that says when we're paving a street, we're supposed to look at what we can do for non-motorized facilities. And so we put the bike lane next to a paved area for pedestrians to walk. Now, in terms of how we think about bicycle facilities and building out the bicycle network, I think there's been a lot of change in research in the standards. And so back earlier in my career, it seemed like the go-to was the shared use path, which in a lot of situations can be a great tool. So if you're biking between Issaquah and Redmond on the shared use path that's King County has, it's a really great facility. But then once you start getting into more dense situations, you start running into problems with the bicyclists getting too close to the pedestrians and the speed. And I don't think the standards have quite caught up to the speeds that e-bikes can have. So I would say that all this would be more of the design that we would look at than necessarily the policy, but that's something that we're definitely paying attention to and thinking about what is the right bike facility based on current standards and also with this trend with more and more e-bikes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. Anyone else? Commissioner Adair?
Just a quick question. On page 40, when I'm looking at the map of the bike level of traffic stress, now, is this to register the slopes, or is this the overall stress of all the different biking areas, regardless of
Let
slope?
me see if I think I have that slide as a resource one, so we can just all see.
Yeah.
Okay, is this the map that you were referring to?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and what I dropped into the PowerPoint is the updated version, but it is different than the version you would see in your materials for
So-
tonight. So this takes into account slope and other factors as well.
Okay, because there's nothing on Newport. Is that because it's flat? Or there's no real color for Newport?
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, there's nothing on that section at Newport Way between Maple and Sunset because there's no bike lanes. Now, we do have protected bike lanes planned out there.
But it's because technically they're riding on the sidewalk. I get it. Yeah, it's level 5. It's like- Yeah, okay, that was my question. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Adair. Anyone else? Vice Chair Patterson?
Thank you, Chair. I have a potentially silly question, but I'll ask it. What's the difference between a bicycle network and a bicycle facility?
Yeah, the bicycle network includes all of the bike facilities. So all the shared use paths, trails, and bike lanes in a city make up the network, basically. So it's more of that kind of wider view rather than just being focused in on certain types of facilities.
Okay. Looks like we're ready to move on.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to talk about leading pedestrian interval next. So LPI is when a pedestrian walks up to a signalized intersection, presses the little pedestrian push button, and instead of their walk sign being simultaneous with the cars that they're parallel to, they get a couple of seconds to get out into the crosswalk, establish their visibility, and then the cars that they're parallel with get the green light to move through the intersection. This does a couple of things. It really enhances safety for pedestrians. There's a Federal Highway Administration study that showed that there is a 13% reduction in pedestrian vehicular collisions at intersections where LPI is present versus not. So this is a really important kind of safety consideration for the city to take on. The city has used LPI or has LPI at certain intersections kind of on an as-needed basis. However, we'd like to really standardize this for the prioritized pedestrian connections in our pedestrian LOS policy. I will note that changing signal timing like this means that there are implications for auto delay. So we had our consultants map what the projected change in auto delay might be at intersections. And we did find that there are 4 intersections where there was where cars would experience a delay of 3 seconds or more if LPI was present at that intersection. More intersections than this, however, improved because it allows for other vehicle movements to move through the intersection. But we're topping out on my knowledge in terms of traffic modeling here, so you might have to talk to John about any other questions about how exactly that works. But I think it's important to know that we know that this will change the way cars flow through our system, and that TAB was really keen to make sure that any changes here don't significantly degrade auto LOS beyond the standards that the city has already established, like John mentioned at the top, to make sure we're still meeting our city established standard of D or better at all of our intersections. So with that, this change is reflected in a new transportation element policy, D3, implementing LPI at all of our priority pedestrian corridors. There are a couple of actions we need to take in the mobility action plan in order to make this possible. We'd have to upgrade our pedestrian push buttons so that they're accessible for hard of hearing pedestrians. We'd have to update our signal timing to take into account this probably 3 or 4 second delay for pedestrians. And as requested by the TAB, we'd have to monitor the impact to auto LOS, so a little bit more staff work to make sure that cars are moving through at the speed at which we expect and not sitting for longer than we'd expect. TAB was supportive of these kind of higher policy level changes and the way that they're incorporated into the documents. All right, so any feedback, questions on this?
Commissioner Zakharoff.
What's the timeline of implementation if we support it right now?
That's a good question. John, can you talk a little bit about the cost of doing LPI?
The cost is hardly anything. The biggest thing is staff time. And right now, the biggest challenge is the traffic signal operations engineer position. It's vacant. We're actively recruiting to replace that position. But that would be the biggest holdup for most of the intersections. And then I don't think it would be too difficult to replace the pedestrian push buttons, but we would want to make sure we did that beforehand. So I guess not really completely answering your question. It's one that we could do faster than a lot of other things, but we also need to acknowledge we have some staff limitations at the moment.
Thank you, Commissioner Zakharoff. Jillian, what are those 4 intersections
Oh, that's a good question.
that are problematic?
If I can stop screen sharing for a moment, I can pull up the map and look at it really quick. All right, I'm just looking at a map that doesn't have a ton of street level detail, but the first one, I believe, is in central Issaquah by Tibbetts Valley Park on SR 900, so maybe Newport and SR 900. Is this one? Where is this 3.1?
Okay, so, yeah, the first one is Newport and SR 900. Oh, the rest are on, like, Highlands and Ellis, Highlands and Park, and one north of that. Yeah, Highlands and something else, but I'm not sure what street it is.
Great, thank you. And the idea with the implementation is to see how it works in other areas of the city and leave those 4 to kind of see the impact?
Well, actually, those 4, just for context, are actually all currently at level of service A or B. So these are intersections that have experienced almost no delay in our transportation concurrency modeling. So it might actually be acceptable to have a 4 or 5 second delay added when there are pedestrians. This is the question we're asking you, essentially. Is it acceptable to have this kind of delay where it's not really actually going to degrade the auto LOS experience at those intersections?
Commissioner Matthews.
Just a question on that. When you add the 4 seconds at the beginning so that the pedestrians could cross, does that mean it's 4 seconds longer or 8 seconds longer on top of the timing they have for pedestrians to cross now, or does time allowed for pedestrians to cross does not change?
That's a good question. John, do you know the answer to that one?
I think the answer is that they would still have the same length of time, but I'll confess I'm not a traffic signal engineer, and I would have to check with one.
I think it's a good idea. I was just curious. That might make people cranky, but I mean, it's a good idea because I've been to I think in Seattle, they have a few spots where they have this in place, and it really makes a difference to see pedestrians are already out in front.
And I think if I can just address that briefly, there was discussion at TABA whether or not this would be blanket implemented, so you wouldn't have to press the button for it to add the LPI, or if it has to be pedestrian initiated. I think that's gonna be something that's up to staff's discretion as we look at these intersections. There might be some where it's just always going to be safer to have a little bit of a lead time for pedestrians, and there might be some where if we're seeing auto delays or if they're less frequently used by pedestrians where we'd want that to be pedestrian initiated. So just to kind of share a little bit more about the implementation there.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Matthews. Yeah, it seems like the right idea. I think everybody's cranky regardless if they're in traffic. Okay.
Okay, if we're good on LPI, we'll move on to the next item, which is transit signal priority. So, oh, actually, sorry, I need to be screen sharing again. Give me a moment. Okay. All right, sorry for that delay. Okay, so transit signal priority is a system by which we adjust the timing of traffic signals' red and green phases to reduce the time that a transit vehicle spends waiting at a red light. It also helps kind of assess like when a bus is approaching an intersection, it might increase the length of a green light so it can clear the intersection before the red light cycle starts. This is one of our biggest tools to help address transit reliability and speed that we have, so this is why we're interested in pursuing this change to our policy, especially because we know how important transit reliability and speed are for ridership. People won't rely on it if it's not going to be regular and reliable. So we also know that just like LPI, changing the traffic signals in this way is going to have effects on auto LOS, and the effects are a little bit greater here than they were with LPI. So the mapping that our consultant did when we presented this to TAB found that the way that they had essentially assessed if there were going to be auto delays was it overestimated the impact to cars in a couple of ways. First, it didn't assume that enough buses actually got green lights because then TSP doesn't matter, right? If a bus is already going through an intersection on a green light, TSP isn't initiated and the timing of that intersection isn't changed, but the model didn't account enough for that. But with all of that said, and some of those disclaimers, there were 6 intersections that would have had a delay of 20 or more seconds if TSP was initiated when a bus is present. So this is not all times of day. This is just when a bus is going through that intersection. And thinking about transit frequency in Issaquah right now, this is not something that happens every 10 minutes at all of our busiest intersections. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit more dispersed than that, because I know that that's a big number to hear. Sitting at a light for an additional 20 seconds is a big delay to ask for. So I also want to note that more intersections also benefit from TSP, because when it allows the bus to go through on the green light, it also allows more cars to clear that intersection as well. So I just want to kind of give you all the information about what kind of auto delay we might expect from this and just be really realistic about it, but we know what the benefits are as well. TAB was comfortable with this so long as, again, we monitor the impact on auto delay and ensure that the investments to implement TSP are practical and feasible. One note on implementation: we have to do this in partnership with our transit service providers. We can't flip a switch and tomorrow implement TSP. We have to work with them to do it on the routes where it makes sense for Sound Transit and King County Metro. So with that, I'm going to ask you the 2 questions I've been asking all night, and any questions or feedback.
Any questions, any feedback? Commissioner Matthews, is that a new hand or? Oh. Interesting.
Okay.
Okay. I think we can move on.
Okay. We are on to our last item. And it's probably the most comprehensive of the changes that we're going to talk about tonight. And it's a change to our transit level of service. So I'm actually not going to talk about this slide at the moment. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what our current transit LOS is. So right now, we just assess what amenities are present at bus stops and then score them like you see on the bottom right corner of the screen. Any bus stops that have a yellow or a green dot meet our level of service for transit. They have scored enough amenity points to be compliant. We know that what's at bus stops is important, but we also think that how people get to bus stops, and the reliability of transit, the frequency of transit is really important. And although we aren't transit service providers, we want to have a more developed tool to advocate with our transit service providers and to really list what the city can do, because our transit level of service policy doesn't do a good job of taking into account the kind of improvements that we can make to our transit system. So with that, this is kind of a monster of a chart, so I'll just talk about a few things that are on this slide. So this is our proposed transit level. This is our proposed transit level of service policy. So it's broken out by frequency of service, which is those 3 tiers you have there. Frequent service is about every 15 minutes or more frequent. Regular service is 30 minutes. Tier 3 on-demand flexible service is what we would know as Metro Flex here in Issaquah. And then we break out essentially how frequent and reliable is that service, what's the mobility considerations there. There are some things in Tier 1 that we can do, like implement TSP to improve reliability and service if it's adopted, but there are places where we're going to need to advocate with our service providers to say, hey, we really need this Tier 1 frequent service. And some of the ways we can do that and show that we're a good partner in that work are through those place and access considerations. So place is pretty similar to the current transit LOS that we have. It talks about what amenities are present at bus stops, but it tiers it out. So it calls for a higher level of bus stop amenities along our Tier 1 routes rather than Tier 2. It's also important to note that our transit service providers are the organizations that provide and maintain all of our bus stops and their amenities. So this is, again, something that we need to advocate for. And this is a place where tab feedback was really important. They wanted to include ridership in some way, so this is why it's tiered out in this way, taking into account daily boardings. And then finally, access. This is the place where Issaquah can kind of do the most to demonstrate our need for transit and to better connect Issaquah residents to transit. So some of the things that we can do here are take actions like implement our pedestrian level of service policy, which really calls for a lot of those enhanced connections or standard sidewalks in areas that are close to our bus routes. We can implement enhanced street crossings, so that can kind of fly into or be featured in our capital improvement plan. We also have the ability to prioritize bike facilities with some of those more comfortable bike level of traffic stress scores that are adjacent to bus stops. So this really speaks to what the city can do as well as what we can advocate for in providing higher levels of transit service to our community. So I know there's a lot on the screen. So I guess I'll ask if there are any questions about this. It's mainly included in the transportation element, summarizing the new LOS. There are also sections to talk about safety, to speak to the moment that transit safety is having in King County right now at the request of TAB. And it denotes the advocacy versus direct city role in a lot of this work. And then there are some new actions to kind of really direct staff in that. And TAB was supportive of these changes. Any questions or feedback that you have on these?
Commissioner Millender-Irwin.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question about the city's advocacy in terms of, is there an actual formal plan for Metro in terms of having some accountability as far as what equity and advocacy would look like for users of transit?
Yeah, so there's a functional part to this question. I believe Metro reviews their bus service, and it looks like my computer has died. So, but I do have it on a flash drive if we need the presentation. Reviews their service twice a year, and they work with their partner cities to do that. So that's a place where we can advocate for that higher level of service. And then can you repeat the second part of your question about equity in transit service?
My interest as far as equity is what does that look like in terms of what the city is doing in terms of advocacy? What is the city asking for as far as what Metro is able to do? So how do they work together?
Okay. I wish that our senior transportation planner, who has been really key in a lot of this, Thomas Valdries, was here. But I do know that part of what the city wants to be able to do with this transit level of service policy is point to this and say that we have real need for transit access in Issaquah. We have real need for more frequent service that would allow folks to take transit to work or to school in a way that they maybe currently can't in Issaquah. I can't speak to the specifics regarding equity, but knowing that our goal is to increase ridership, which can be one of the main barriers for folks, is the kind of high-level answer I can give you right now. John, I see that you unmuted. Maybe you have some more.
Yeah, I wish Thomas were here as well, because he knows it much better than I do. I do know that King County Metro has their service guidelines, and equity is a factor that they consider as part of planning services.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Just, Thomas will be here in October twice, so you can ask him then as well.
Any other questions? I'm happy to get it pulled up if we need to see it again at all.
Yeah, well, I believe that's the end of Jillian and John's presentation, so now would be a good time, just round robin, or just, any questions, any comments about the entire package you just heard?
There is one other piece of feedback I just wanted to mention,
Sure, please.
if that's okay. So we talked a lot about the places where TAB supported a lot of these changes. There was one change. TAB requested that we had proposed removing the MAP action under 7.2, and I'll read the action. It's to research and adopt an impact metric that better reflects the multimodal system performance and efficient use of existing infrastructure as a replacement to or supplement for intersection LOS. We're proposing removing this action because that's what this project is designed to do, is to enhance our multimodal considerations. In this case, it's as a supplement to intersection LOS rather than a complete overhaul of the system, but that's well within the action's kind of guidelines there. So TAB would propose that we keep that so that we have the option to again review this, but we're saying that we are doing this work through the project. So I just wanted to note that. But
So the actual advisory board is for removal, or I'm sorry, for keeping it.
they didn't take a vote, which is a little bit unfortunate. They had 1 or 2 members who were interested in keeping it. I wish we had that kind of official full board support or against it, but I just don't have that information. So
But ultimately, it sounds like the planners, analysts
Mhm.
are thinking this is redundant.
yeah.
Okay. Any questions for Jillian or John? Any comments for Jillian and John? Commissioner Olener?
Just had what's probably an obnoxious comment. Reading through the 5.5-page staff memo, I noted there were 10 different abbreviations, which took me a little while to memorize. But my more to the point question is the last LOS that we were talking about in terms of transit. I think the term level of service, or LOS, is being used in a number of different ways. And I'm just wondering whether, when it comes to transit, where the city's role is really more of an advisory one, whether it's really quality of service as opposed to level of service, because level of service could be, the length of time it takes a vehicle to get through an intersection, and that's not really what we're talking about when it comes to this transit LOS.
I'm just
an observation.
Yeah, just think out loud for a minute here. So you notice how we do call bike level of traffic stress something different, because we're not prescribing the exact level of service we expect of certain bike facilities or at intersections, right? So I think there's certainly some precedent for changing it. I think keeping it at LOS might have some advantages in our ability to use it as an advocacy tool to say, these are really the guidelines that our community supports and the kind of transit service and amenities and access that we want here in Issaquah. So something for us to maybe kind of noodle on a little bit, but.
Yeah, again, not an important question, but thank you.
All questions are important, Commissioner Olener. Okay, well, we're going to try this one more time. Anybody else, any comments for John or Jillian? All right, well, thank you both for the presentation.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
I want to make sure I capture your feedback and your level of support for these changes appropriately when it moves to mobility and infrastructure later this month. So I guess I'm curious what your level of support is for these changes.
Anybody want to, Commissioner Kraft?
The fact that it went through 4+ times with the people who are closer to it gives me, makes me feel good that this has been well thought through, both with staff as well as the people who focus on it. So part of my question is like, what do you want from us? I mean, just another set of like 6 random folks. But I think it's, all worth, our endorsement. And we had a couple different questions here and there. But I think the fact that you're going to be looking at impacts and understanding what's feasible and what's not. My only feedback earlier was don't have policies you don't do anything about, because then it makes them meaningless. Just be clear about that. But I think it was all good.
Vice Chair Patterson.
Yeah, I kind of echo that sentiment. I think PPC has had the fortune of doing a lot of heavy lifting on other things like Title 18 and whatnot. And it seems like in this regard, the Transportation Advisory Board did a lot of the heavy lifting from a commission standpoint. And I think they did a great job. I really applaud their efforts as well as the efforts of staff in putting this together. And personally, I'm in agreement with the feedback that they provided on these things and support their expertise on the topic.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Zakharoff.
I would also be in agreement of all of the proposed changes. I would be curious to see how the consideration and how the conversation with King County Metro and Sun Transit will be on increasing of bus routes in the city. So this is, I know that one of the bus routes, I think, coming today. We have some new bus routes coming today or this week. I have just seen an announcement, but I really hope that we can get an increased amount of buses in the city.
We do the round robin. Commissioner Adair.
No, overall, I think Transportation Board has done an excellent job with this. I think most everything is covered. Idea of, just take a look at schools and keep that in mind. But that's my only input.
Fantastic. Commissioner Olener.
No, I agree with all the comments made today, and I appreciate the level of detail and thoroughness that the staff and the TAB went through. Thank you.
Commissioner Millender-Irwin.
I have to echo all the comments. I think there's a tremendous amount of great staff work done here. TAB has done a lot of really strong due diligence here, so I'm in support of the requested changes.
Commissioner Matthews.
I also agree. It's very comprehensive and detailed and really thought through, and I also support this.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And I'm in agreement with all of you. This was clearly thoroughly thought out, and want to thank you to TAB and our staff who did a great job. Again, it's easy to nitpick something, but I think Vice Chair Patterson said it, or maybe Commissioner Kraft. This has been through 4 different iterations, and people that are a lot closer to it have done a tremendous job. So
Thank you all for your time and feedback today.
Yeah,
it's
of
much
course.
Appreciated.
Yeah, and thank you, Jillian, and thank you, John, for joining us. So now, if I understand this correctly, Kristen, this entire packet will be going for a public hearing in 2 weeks.
Correct.
So the public will have their opportunity to weigh in. I like every public hearing, and we'll see what comes from that. Okay, again, thank you, Jillian. Thank you, John, for the presentation. We're going to move on to City Council updates. So I believe this is Kristen.
It is. So I just have 2. One is that the proposed tree code amendments went to the Planning, Development, and Environment Committee night before last. Can't think about it. Night before last. And they are recommending moving it forward to City Council. They're recommending approval. However, they would like staff to come back in December and start working on proposed amendments to the tree code. So there are some things that they think could be reworked a little better, but most of it I think they think is pretty good. So they want to get it passed, but then come back and fix a few things The other one is that you all may want to watch this one because it involves you all, or it will involve you all. We went to the Committee of the Whole Council on Monday night, and they are this year taking a stab at prioritizing the work for the Community Planning and Development Department, kind of based one on our workload and one things that they really would like to see done that have not gotten done yet. And their top priority is getting, most of you don't remember this, but we did, Eco Northwest, a consultant, did a study for us. We were trying to implement 3 of our different strategies of the housing strategy action plan that we have in place. And we asked Eco Northwest to work with us on those amendments, and they essentially said, you can't move forward with these until you fix what's already in place. We wanted to expand some programs, and they said, you really can't move forward with these until you fix what's in place. And they gave us several different things that needed to be addressed. One was residential parking and structured facilities, which the state has taken care of because we are no longer allowed to require structured parking in multifamily facilities. But there are still other things to look at. So that was the council's #1 priority to move forward. So all of those changes will be coming through to you many times next year. Yeah.
All right. Any other business or announcements?
You mentioned, Commissioner Boyce, the staff reductions or smaller staff that we have now. Yeah, and in May, we had 4 total who were reviewing plans, and we had a vacancy for a senior planner. In June, 3 of those staff left, and we still had the vacancy for the senior planner, so it was down to 1 reviewer and me, because Stephen left as well. So that is why some of the things that we talked about can't be done. However, we have since hired, 2 new associate planners. Emily Medina has been promoted to senior planner. We are about to start interviewing for both an assistant planner and a principal planner to fill my role, and I've taken the planning manager position. So I don't even know if I've had the time to tell you that I am now the Planning Policy Commission liaison again. Hello. So I'm back. I also just wanted to make a comment. It came up, I think Commissioner Crash, you said, it's been through the tab, the Transportation Advisory Board 4 times, and they're the experts. I'm not quite sure what you want from us. It's always nice to hear, one, another perspective, and 2, the tab, they are the experts on it, which also makes it nice to hear because we want the public to be able to understand our transportation element and our comprehensive plan. And if it is written always with such expertise that nobody can understand it doesn't mean anything. So we need to know from you all as well that it's understandable from at least most, if not all, people. So just thought I'd mention that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Might require a long evening with a bottle of wine, but I'm sure they can get through it. Okay, well, thank you. And one thing I didn't know, but I don't think we announced this last time, but I didn't realize Valerie was gone. So, yeah, our assistant planner, Valerie Porter, has also left. So we wish Valerie the best. But yeah, that happened during the summer as well. I think that covers everything. Okay. Any comments, anything for the good of the order from the commission? Anything from staff? All right, well, it was great seeing everyone. We'll do it again in 2 weeks. We will adjourn this meeting of the Planning Policy Commission at 8 p.m. Thank you.